Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you call it, Get Covered Illinois wants you to know that you need to enroll in a health plan before January 31st. Having health insurance is the law. If you don't get coverage, you may have to pay a penalty of $695 or more. Coverage is more affordable than you think. Most people can find monthly premiums for $75 or less. Go to getcoveredillinois.gov or call 866-311-1119 to get free in-person help. That's 866-311-1119. Enroll today.
Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Our phone lines are open for questions or stories. The number to call is 661-244-9831. Make sure you press the number 1 to get into queue. We'll try to get to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, our chat room is open so you can post any comments or questions there as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific questions, comments, or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
You know, tonight we have a very special guest, award-winning science writer and journalist, and now paranormal author, Louisa Oakley Green. Louisa has written a new book called Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country, Tales Retold by a Psychic Bystander, which takes you on a journey through the many mystical areas of the human experience, both scientifically and non-scientifically. You not only hear stories from many people who come from humble neighborhoods, you also get to read some interesting answers to questions everyone has had on their minds, like finding out the 5 reasons why ghosts inhabit areas based on what a paranormal researcher observed over 25 years of investigating house hauntings. Learn why house hunters may want to ask their real estate agents if the home they're viewing is a quote-unquote stigmatized property. Find out what the term means and how you could end up with more residents than you bargained for if you don't do some paranormal research before your house closing. We know you'll be captivated with intrigue tonight, so let's find out more and hear from an amazing woman. Please help me in welcoming Louisa Oakley Green. Hi, Louisa. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Welcome, Louisa. You know, it's so great to have you on the show. You know, your book is called Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country, Tales Retold by a Psychic Bystander. Just what is a psychic bystander?
Well, that's a term I coined for myself because I am not psychic in the least, but I married a psychic more than 20 years ago. I'd say about half of his family is psychic. It does tend to be inherited, and I have a lot of friends who are, so I feel like I'm surrounded, and I'm basically just a bystander telling their stories.
Well, you know what? As we did some research on you and your book, I couldn't help but be fascinated by your professional history. You have a very scientific background in writing and research and a very analytical mind as a result. So how do you balance this experience with being a psychic bystander?
Well, I'm fascinated by anything that is mysterious, and that includes both science and mysticism. In science, a lot of the things that we think are hard facts are really more than theories that people think are probably true because they've done experiments that seem to indicate they are, although I think we all know that gets overturned every once in a while. So science isn't quite as solid as we think it is, and mysticism isn't necessarily as mysterious as we think it is. So I'm fascinated by both.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, as we all become more aware of the universe, we've become more open to psychic ability, but not all of us. So how do you explain and define what it is to be psychic or even to have a psychic experience?
Well, that's a pretty broad term. It could include many things. Some people consider seeing or having some type of communication with the departed as being psychic, and that's certainly the type of things you see on TV, although only the negative side of it. Out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences. There's just so many different avenues, precognitive dreams. It's a very broad brush.
Well, Louisa, you know, Lucy and I are an avid proponent for making sure that we do extensive research, either, you know, for our radio show or when we investigate haunted locations. You know, we tend to have that trait also, too, in our personal lives. You know, it's always good to discover, you know, the right answers instead of believing just what people say is the right answer. How extensive did you research the stories and the phenomenon for the book Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country, as well as your other previous book, which is also another great book, Loitering at the Gate to Eternity?
Well, I did a number of different things. First, I started off as a journalist before I became a science writer, so I used that background to interview people about things that have happened in their life. And I think out of all the people I've interviewed over 2 books, and each book has 100 stories in it or more. I only found one person who just hit me the wrong way, and I said, no, I'm not including that story. These people have nothing to gain from having their stories in my book because they only have their first names, and they don't get paid, and most of them actually don't want anyone to know that it's their story. So that's one aspect, the journalistic aspect. And then I also used my research experience to research the latest studies that have been done, the latest scientific studies that have been done on psychic phenomenon, which I find equally fascinating, so I have a little bit of both in the second book.
Had you sort of, while you were interviewing and talking to the folks that are in these books, had you come across a story that you may not have heard of or were maybe questionable about, not so much the story itself, but maybe the phenomenon itself, and then went back and did more research on it to find out, I guess, more information? Yeah,
I think the one that really struck me as odd, because I still don't know what to make of it, and if someone out there does, let me know, is an experience that one young woman that I interviewed had with seeing eyeless people. She's incredibly psychic, and she sees these people who have no eyes. And when I interviewed her, I thought, wow, that's a pretty strange story. So I started researching it after I interviewed her to see, has this ever turned up anywhere else? And lo and behold, there was another story of someone who reported exactly the same phenomenon she did, but instead of in Florida, where she lived, it was up in New York. And I just thought, wow, what are the chances? And his story was just as detailed as hers.
And when you say eyeless, is that meaning that there's no eyes, they just have skin there, or is it just that it's hollow inside?
No, skin. If you'd like, I'll tell her story.
Sure, yeah, I'm interested in it.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is a young lady I actually met over Twitter because she liked my first book, so I met her over Twitter. And she is studying to be a nurse in Florida. Right now she works in an old age home. And her name is Katrina. And she was visited many times by an entity that really puzzled her and actually frightened her when she was younger. The first time she saw the creature, she was about 4 years old. Now, her father works for carnivals, or he did when she was growing up. So he was a carny, and they used to travel up and down the East Coast, and she'd be in the car a lot. So one time they had pulled into a gas station, and her parents left her in the car for a few minutes, because today people would freak out, but I guess in those days they didn't. And while she was alone in the car, she looked up through the car window, and she saw a white translucent woman floating above the car. Now, one detail about the woman made Katrina catch her breath, and that was this woman had no eyes, just skin where the eyes should have been. And she was a child, so she wasn't really frightened. She was just puzzled. She stared at the floating apparition for a while, but it didn't move or say anything. When her parents came back, she turned to point out the woman to them, and the specter was gone. But that would be only the first of many visits. The next time she saw the woman was in a dream when she was about 10 years old. And in the dream, she was in a house and looked out the window into a flat field. The woman was standing in the middle of the field and had a message for her. But she was so frightened that she ran into the bedroom and pulled the covers over her head. She continued to see the apparition even as she grew out of childhood and into her high school years. She would be coming out of work and walking to her car, and she'd see this apparition next to her car or sitting inside of it. But by the time she got there, she'd be gone. She'd also see this eyeless creature standing like on a street corner. Her most recent brush with the entity was 3 years ago when she was 22. And this was the only time she would be close enough to where if she had wanted to, she could have reached out and touched this eyeless woman. It was the night before leaving relatives in Michigan to move back to Florida. And it was 3:02 a.m. in the morning, and those of us who study the paranormal all know that 3 a.m. seems to be that magic time.
Right.
Now, she woke up because she felt a weight on the corner of her air mattress. And she said that this woman, this creature, was just sitting there. And she knew she was just sitting there, but she ignored the woman, frightened, hoping she'd go away. And about 2 minutes later, it got up and walked and left the room. Now, she was married shortly after that, and she hasn't been visited by the eyeless woman since. But now, since she has studied the paranormal more, she's not afraid of it anymore, and she's hoping at some point it will come back so she can figure out what the message is that this creature wanted to give her. Now, that's the strangest one I've heard in a long time.
For that one, I mean, just by you telling that story, it's sort of, to me, sounds like it could possibly be her guardian angel of some sort. I've heard repeating and recurring experiences where people see the same spirit over and over again, and they equate it to some sort of guardian angel type. And, she may have been frightened because she may not have been aware of things, but I don't think that may have been what that spirit was trying to do. And it's kind of odd that she didn't have eyes.
Non-threatening. You're correct. She said it was non-threatening. Right. And, I mean, I don't try to interpret these stories. I simply tell them because I sincerely don't know what they mean. But what fascinated me was she said, "I know you're going to think I'm crazy," because this is a woman who's studying science. She's becoming a nurse. And I said, "No, I don't think you're crazy, but you know what? Let me research this a little bit and see if anybody else has ever reported the same thing." And lo and behold, I did some research. There was a man in New York State. He was driving over a bridge, and suddenly everything stopped, and this eyeless thing came down. And I don't remember the details of it because this isn't something that I wrote up. I just remember reading it. And so I emailed her, and I said, "Hey, look at this URL. You're going to see your same story." And she messaged me back, "Thank you so much," because she didn't feel quite as crazy knowing that somebody, like 1,400 miles away, saw the same thing she did. So
right, the comfort in knowing that she's not alone.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes that has run along for me as I've been writing these two books is that almost everyone I interview, except people who come from families where psychic ability is completely accepted, which is not that often, all of them say to me after the interview, "Thank you so much for taking me seriously. For the first time in my life, I feel validated." Because most people don't feel like they can talk about this stuff.
Right. It's strange, after all these years, hundreds of years, and even beyond that, but, more closely in the last 50 years, people have opened up more, and it seems to be a little bit more acceptable, but you still find folks who just are too afraid because they have, I don't know if it's shame, embarrassment, of telling these stories to friends and family and, anyone that they would meet. It's they have to feel comfortable in order for them to open up. Did you find it difficult writing? Well, did you find it difficult in writing this book to have people open up to you?
That I didn't have a problem with because I generally enjoy talking to people, and I don't try to steer the conversation. I just start out with, hey, this is who I am, tell me a little bit about yourself, And then I say, well, have you ever had any paranormal experiences? I normally understand that they have because that's why we're talking. And I just let them start talking, and I tend to be a very good listener. So people I find when they actually realize that somebody is listening to them and respecting them tend to open up.
Well,
your
the thing
book,
I find fascinating, okay, with this creature is that this is something new that I've never heard about. And the fact that you found the fact that you found another story that is similar. I mean, every time I've read about something, I mean, there's got to be there. It seems like there's somebody else out there that's had that same experience. But
it's actually somewhat reassuring if you've gone through it.
Yeah.
You know, I have a wonderful imaginary friend story that goes like above and beyond the average little kid talking to imaginary friend story, if you don't mind my telling it, because it's another example of something where I was surprised because this story is a little bit more tangible than most of the, I think my child has an imaginary, that type of thing. But this story was from Christine, who's an export-import coordinator, and it was a story about her little daughter, Marlena, when Marlena was about 3 or 4 years old. And both of them are psychic, and they come from a family where that kind of runs in the family. And I'll talk about that in a minute because that's kind of an interesting point. But they lived in an old home, and Marlena's little bedroom was at the top of the basement stairs so that when her mom would come up the stairs with laundry, she could look in and see how Marlena was playing. Marlena was a very quiet, shy little kid. She tended to play by herself a lot. And she had the typical little girl's room where she had a table with a tea set on it and a little chair, and across from her was a miniature rocking chair, and, she would serve tea. And one day, Christine was coming up the stairs with a load of wash, and she heard Marlena talking to somebody in her cute little voice. And Christine peered into the room, and she saw the rocking chair rocking on its own, and Marlena handed her Barbie doll to whatever was sitting in that chair, and the Barbie doll was suspended in the air. Now, Christine looked at this and went, what? I mean, she's psychic, but that was like a little bit above and beyond anything she'd experienced. So she walked through the threshold of the door, and as soon as she did, the chair stopped rocking, the doll fell to the floor. And she said, Marlena, who are you talking to? And Marlena said to her mother, why, I'm talking to the little girl there. Don't you see her?
Wow.
I thought that was an interesting story because in my mind, when I hear something like that, it's much more tangible than I think my kid is, talking to somebody. Like, she saw something that was so insane that, there's something to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it was witnessed, yeah.
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 That's amazing. Well, your books in the Psychic by Sinister series, their stories, just as you just mentioned now, are from real people, with real lives telling real tales. And after speaking to so many people, either, for the book or outside of the book, has the interaction and that communication with them, I guess, intrigued or maybe even confirmed more things for you about the paranormal, since you sort of are a sort of psychic bystander and having the psychic history to you? Has it changed anything for you while writing these books?
I think I've always been a skeptic because I kind of come from that place,
Right.
I'm not a psychic. Anything that I know about, I've either researched or interviewed people, or, my husband or a relative has, or a friend has experienced. So I'm always hearing this stuff secondhand. But I think that when you interview so many people, and you can feel how sincere they are, and these are not crazy people. These are doctors, lawyers, managers, like nurses, teachers. These are like mainstream America. It can't help but strengthen your feeling that I can't tell you what's out there. I mean, I just don't know for certain, but there is something out there, and we can't explain it, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
Well, it's great to hear that, you're open-minded about the idea. I mean, obviously you're open-minded, you married a psychic, but it's it's great to hear that you're so open-minded about other things in the paranormal as well, and having this, sort of analytical and science background. Do you feel that, folks in the science field should maybe be a little bit more open-minded to the fact of the paranormal? I mean, I understand totally that the paranormal goes against the absolute meaning of science and what it stands for, but do you think, because of what you just said, there's just something out there, you just can't explain it, that maybe they should be a little bit open-minded and there possibly could be things that could be studied?
I think that there are a lot more open-minded people in the science community than you know. They're just not going to talk openly about it, because I was at a freelance job the other day where I do medical writing, and people came up to me and said, "Can I have your bookmark? I meant to buy your book. It sounds fascinating." And I mean, like, these are people who write science all day, and
Right.
I think that certainly there are individuals who are scientists and then individuals who are in other fields who think that this is an absolute crock, and I totally get that, because if you haven't had a personal experience with it, it is kind of hard to believe. But there's also people in every field who are extremely open-minded, have probably experienced this. In fact, I'll give you an example. I was going to explain to you about psychic ability being inherited. And one of the books that I researched when I wrote my first book was by Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who is a neuropsychiatrist who taught at Harvard Medical School. And she experienced something inexplicable in her childhood, so she decided from a purely scientific, I mean like cold, hard scientific approach to write a book called The ESP Enigma, The Scientific Case for Psychic Phenomenon. And it made some interesting points. One of the things she observed was that psychic ability tends to be inherited, and her feeling was that the brain and the nervous system is like an energy antenna. And in people who are very psychic, I mean, we all have different degrees of psychic, but people who are like very talented psychics, they tend to have an extremely sensitive antenna. Most people who are very psychic tend to inherit it, but there's a small minority that become very psychic because of trauma. And the examples that I like to give are, there's a very talented medium in Long Island called George Anderson. And when he was a small child, he came down with the chicken pox, and then he ended up having encephalitis, which is the brain swelling. And they thought he wasn't going to survive, but he did. And when he recovered, he could see dead people as easily as he could see the living. Now, in her mind, her theories, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, that meant that his brain nervous system antenna had been adjusted through trauma. There's another fellow, Joseph McMoneagle, which many people know about because he was in the U.S. military remote viewing program. And that's, for those who may not know, remote viewing is where the U.S. government spies on some remote person or place through psychics. And that was a program for many years, funded by our tax dollars. But he was not psychic until he had a near-death experience, which, again, must have adjusted that brain energy antenna. And the third example I have is a gentleman named Peter Hurkos, who's a very famous psychic in the Netherlands. And he's just working on his house one day on the roof and fell down, hit his head, fell off the ladder. And from that point on, he was psychic. Again, adjusted the antenna. One of the really interesting things she had to say, and remember, this is a Johns Hopkins trained physician. This is no slouch. Her theory, and I've heard this theory from psychics as well, is that psychic ability is actually an evolution of the brain. And this was a hard fact for me to face because I had to look at my husband and say, "You're more evolved than I am." I don't think there are too many wives who want to say that.
Well, you know, one thing that I thought about, okay, when reading the book and thinking about this, is psychic ability versus coincidence. You know, things that happen. And myself, okay, I do this silly little thing every day. I work in a building with a large bank of elevators. They're always busy, and each day I'll push the button to go up, and I'll stand in front of the door that I feel is going to open. And without seeing which ones have already opened, it's usually very early, I'm always right.
Well, that sounds like something my husband would do. You know, he tends to have luck with...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is it actually psychic ability? Could that be, or is it coincidence? I mean, some of these things can happen.
Yeah, you could make either case, but I've heard a lot of psychics say there are no coincidences. And there are people who would make the argument that you are following your intuition, which is Psychic 101. Being aware of your inner voice and your intuition is apparently the beginning of psychic ability, and you can kind of go up from there. And other people would say, well, that's just coincidence. Boy, are you lucky. And I'm not going to really weigh in on either side. You can interpret it either way, really.
Well, okay, and then so the other questions that I really had was like, okay, being married to a psychic. Now, you say that you have no psychic ability, but have you ever experienced any kind of paranormal phenomena that you yourself could not explain?
Oh, well, I'd have to say that I like to tell the story of my father's funeral because that was when I first realized. You have to understand, when I first married my husband, I didn't take psychic ability very seriously. His family came over from Italy. I thought it was charming that they all believed in this stuff, but to me it was more of a cultural thing rather than an actual real thing. And it wasn't until we were married for about 5 years and my father passed away that something happened at his funeral, and then the week later was what blew me away, that made me realize that, okay, something's going on here, and I'm going to have to be more open-minded. I'm going to have to put a little bit more respect into this. What happened was that I was helping my mother plan my father's funeral, and you don't think very clearly when you're doing something like that. You're upset. You just make stupid decisions. And one thing I did was I called the minister who had been at our church when I was growing up. Now, that was 20 years before. So what I didn't realize was that this gentleman had been retired for many years. He was elderly. But when we called, his wife was so thrilled that somebody remembered him that she sent him on over. So we said, all right, fine. He was a very nice gentleman. So at the wake, the minister said to us, would everyone sit down? I'd like to say a few words. So I sat next to my mother, between my mother and my husband. And the minister started to talk, and he kind of lost his focus, and the conversation was wandering aimlessly. But, we realized, oh, my gosh, this guy is not going to give us a coherent eulogy. But he was such a nice gentleman that nobody wanted to, say anything. We all sat politely. And after about 15 minutes of this, my husband leaned over and whispered in my ear, I see your father standing next to the minister. His arms are crossed, his foot is tapping, and he looks very impatient. Now, hearing that alone, interesting, weird, but it wouldn't have impressed me. What happened a week later was what impressed me. That day and for a week afterwards, we didn't really have a chance to talk to too many people. When a lot of people are coming at a funeral, you pretty much only have time to say thank you for coming, before the next person in the line comes along. And a week later, my brother-in-law called and said, Louisa, I didn't want to say anything the day of the funeral, but I just wanted you to know that while the minister was talking, I saw your father standing next to him, and his arms were crossed, and he was tapping his foot, and he looked very impatient. Now, I knew that my husband and his brother had not spoken, and that just blew me away, because I said, oh, my God, how could they both see that? They saw the same thing. So that was kind of the beginning of my realizing that it's not just a charming old custom from the old country. There's something going on here.
So what is it like? What is it like to be married to a psychic and you yourself don't have that ability? I mean, does it change life?
Yeah, change your outlook on life, because I had a much more physically based viewpoint before I met my husband, and now I'm open to an entire world out there that, for me at least, is invisible. And I find it fascinating. I think it's kind of nice to know that we can't explain everything and that there's some wonderful, mysterious things out there. I mean, there's pros and cons to it. He's very sensitive because he always knows what my moods are because he's psychic. But on the downside, he's more vulnerable, as most really good psychics are. He's more vulnerable to neurological problems. A lot of the people I interviewed either had fibromyalgia, migraines, MS, epilepsy. This is not uncommon in people who are very psychic. Almost everyone I've met who's very psychic, has migraines, and my husband's no exception. And you know, I'm going to say something that your male listeners will love. I don't bother arguing with my husband because he's almost always right. And I got to tell you, that's frustrating.
It's hard trying to win an argument in that predicament, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't really argue that much, but when we've had disagreements because I see things differently than he does, he almost always ends up being right. So at this point, I just go, okay, that's the way you see it. That's good.
Well, your book goes into, obviously, because there's so many stories in it, and just to be able to read all of them, you learn so much. Not just about the paranormal itself, but, you know, the interaction between humans and life itself. You know, I always say that, you know, people think that, you know, studying and having a radio show and talking about the paranormal is so morbid. But to me, I think of it as the opposite. It's almost like, you know, celebrating life. It's putting more meaning into life when you're trying to understand the unknown and trying to think of things of, you know, when we're beyond this point. You sort of don't take things for granted while you're still living here.
I completely agree with you. This is part of the human experience, and we should celebrate it.
Exactly. And so, you know, reading the book, you go through a gamut of all different paranormal phenomena, and one of them is past lives, which, you know, I haven't studied and haven't researched a whole heck of a lot. We've done a couple of shows on it. It does fascinate me, but I don't know how past lives fit into the whole paranormal thing. And, you know, whenever I think of past lives, there's always that famous woman in India, the story of Shanti Devi, which I know is, you know, if everybody reads or knows about past lives, Shanti Devi is pretty famous and well known. And her story is really one of amazement that if you do read her story, that it sort of will make you reconsider the doubt about reincarnation. But hearing the stories for yourself from the people that you've interviewed and talked to about past lives, do you find that there may be something more to it? And I don't know what your religious background is or what your belief system is, but do you believe that there is more to reincarnation in past lives than we may even realize?
It makes sense to me. I mean, one of the things that I cite in my second book is a study by the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, and they studied 2,416 cases of young children who remembered past lives. And most people who remember past lives tend to do so when they're young. These kids were from all around the world. Most of them were fairly poor, but they basically, in 50% of the cases, the children who remembered past lives were able to supply incredible details of the past life. And in 60% of the ones who gave them those details, they were actually able to positively identify the person from the past life.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting to note that also in 60% of cases of kids who remember past lives, their previous life ended violently by tragic accident or intentional wounding. So the trauma of their death seems to have carried over into the next life and helped them remember it. A lot of these kids were living in remote villages, and they had no internet and no way of knowing anything about life outside of their villages, but they still had evidence of memories from a person so far away there's no way they could know about them, and when they were taken to those remote villages, they not only remembered the past life, they could identify places and people there without any prompting, which I find amazing. And it's also interesting that a lot of them, because their past life was so embedded in their sense of being, had some interesting little quirks. For instance, many of them wanted to dress and play like someone of the opposite past life gender. Now, this gives an interesting twist to cross-dressing. You know, what if the reason why people like to cross-dress is because they strongly identify with a past life, and they liked what they were doing in their past life.
Right.
There were Hindu kids who were rejecting food because it was not prepared in their past life Muslim manner, which is interesting. A lot of them harbored fears related to their previous deaths. For instance, a fear of water was seen in people who drowned. Makes sense. And some of them possessed unusual skills from a past life that they were never taught, such as playing a musical instrument. Now, if you think about it, Mozart was able to play and compose at the age of 4 and 5 brilliantly. What if that came from a past life? It would certainly make sense.
There's also, I've heard also too links to autism in kids, and I find it more coming out now, and I don't know the relevance of it or the medical research and background, but I'm hearing a lot more about autism in children and the possible link with past lives or some sort of reincarnation, because there was one study that I read not too long ago that linked, or the statistics were that children who had autism had a higher percentage of kids who were recalling past lives. And I don't know if there is a link. I don't know if have you heard anything about that?
I hadn't, but that's fascinating. That's really, really interesting.
It is, and I wouldn't call myself a 100% believer. Lucy knows this as well as everybody who listens to our show. There's always a skeptical eye that's open with me because I like to, if I don't experience it myself, I have to, do a heck of a lot of research to find out.
Absolutely. Totally feel the same way on that.
Yeah, it's just I need to find out all the angles. And at that point even, too, once I even do get to that point, I still don't make up my mind yet, or I'm not leaning in any way at all. But with
I think that's very healthy.
It is. It's very healthy, and it keeps me well-rounded and grounded, and it keeps me more alert, I think. And again, it goes back to doing the research and not believing what people say all the time. I like to discover it myself. But within past lives, there's a lot of the past life regression and hypnosis. Do you feel that, I don't know if you've done any research on this, but do you feel that going to a hypnotist to reveal a past life, do you think that's formulating and creating that history and that story, or do you think it is just conjuring it up, the truth that already exists?
I guess the only way you could possibly establish that you were not conjuring it up from, say, maybe you're well-read or seen something, would be if you could identify a detail that you would have no way of knowing. It would simply be beyond your experience, like these children who couldn't have known somebody from a village, 300 miles away that was just as remote as their village. You know what I mean? That's the type of thing that would convince me. Just being hypnotized and going back and coming up with some nifty details, that's nice. But if you can't verify it somewhere else or have some little nugget or detail that you couldn't possibly have known, there's just no way to know.
I agree.
Well, see, now, Anthony, is the skeptic. Me, I tend to believe this only because of my own experience. The first time I had ever gone to New Orleans, the first time I stepped into the French Quarter, I knew where every single street was. I knew stores. When I walked into St. Louis Cathedral, I knew everything. I knew where everything was.
Yeah,
and
see that, isn't that fun?
It was brilliant. I mean, and to this day, I am so tied to New Orleans and the whole area. But I had never been there before. I'm born and raised in Chicago. Never went there before. But yet, I even, because I went with a friend, and she couldn't believe that I knew where everything was. I knew every street. I knew where stores were. She said I needed something. I said, we can just go here, here, here. And everything was there. And I still have this. I took a trip this year to England. This is another situation where I'm a Chicago kid. I'm here. I have no ties to England whatsoever. But yet the city of London, I had that same feeling where I was familiar with it. I knew it. I knew where everything was. And these are just like two instances, and there's two places in the world so far apart and so far from where I was raised that I know where these things are. I don't remember details, but yet I know these locations intimately. I know them like the back of my hand.
Let me give you something interesting to think about. We're actually talking about consciousness and where it resides. And there was an interesting study done by the University of Virginia by Dr. Bruce Grayson. And basically, after they had done an exhaustive study of consciousness and where consciousness resides, they came up with the theory or suggestion that consciousness actually resides outside of the brain, and they had 4 lines of evidence for that. Okay, we already talked about one of them, and that was all these kids who seem to have had past lives. And just to fill in a little bit more information, they spontaneously started talking about past lives usually between the ages of 2 and 5, and the memories faded usually between the ages of 6 and 9. Now, there's 3 other reasons why they think that the brain is not really where consciousness resides. Instead, they think that the brain is kind of like a cell phone. The message doesn't really originate in the cell phone. The cell phone's just a transmitter. And they think the brain is a transmitter in the same way. Now, one of the lines of evidence they found was called deathbed lucidity. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's been reported in medical journals for 250 years. So this is nothing new. In the hours before death, patients who previously had little or no mental functioning due to some sort of neurologic or psychiatric disorder, it could be tumors, strokes, dementia, schizophrenia, they suddenly show a return to mental clarity in the hours before death. And in one particular study of dementia caregivers in the United Kingdom, 70% of patients with dementia became completely lucid in the hours before death. And the researchers suggested that while a damaged brain may keep a person from thinking, as it dies, the consciousness is no longer tethered to expressing itself through the brain. Here's another interesting thing. Their second line of evidence, I'll say third because we talked about past life, was consciousness without a brain. Now, there was a young lady who was in an automobile accident, and just as a routine, she was not seriously hurt, but just as a routine precaution, they took an MRI. And what they found was that this very intelligent honor student had very little brain tissue at all. In fact, all she had was a brain stem. Now, as you may know, according to modern medicine, someone with only a brain stem should not be able to form any thought at all, and yet she could, and she's not the only example. Okay, so, the brain was not doing it for her in that particular case. The last thing that they felt was evidence that consciousness probably does not reside outside of rather in the brain, but outside of it, was near-death experiences. And as I'm sure most of your listeners know, that's when people who are pronounced clinically dead are later resuscitated, and if they had memories while they were clinically dead, that's called a near-death experience. And these people, who were NDA survivors, had accounts that often include vivid perceptions of things that they had no way of knowing that went on not only around them, where they could have heard it, except they were clinically dead, but also miles away. So that's what made them feel that they had evidence to support the theory that consciousness lurks outside the brain. I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. But I want to touch on something. Now, being paranormal investigators, we know that locations with activity can have certain things that seem to happen over and over. Why is it that, and I want to say some spirits, seem to cling to a place or even an object?
Why do they do it? Well, I'm not exactly sure why they do it. I mean, I've heard theories. Some people don't know they're dead because apparently the transition from life to death is pretty subtle. So unless you're on a deathbed and you know you're dying, you may not realize you're dead. I'm kind of repeating the stuff I've done research on. I have no way of knowing for sure. Another reason might be that they have either a strong attachment to a place or a thing or unfinished business. It's kind of interesting. There's a paranormal researcher, Debbie Chestnut, who, and you had mentioned her in the opening, who spent 25 years investigating house hauntings. And based on her experiences, she has 5 main reasons she believes ghosts hang around. And these are actually the way they hang around more than why they hang around. The first one are ghosts that she calls home sweet home ghosts. And those are previous owners that return to their home after death. And these are the type of ghosts where you hear footsteps and doors opening and closing and water left running. And it's because they're still going through their usual routines. And as far as they're concerned, you're just extra residents in their home. They usually have a bit of a personality and they can interact with you. The second type she calls landlubbers, or I call landlubbers, but she describes them as someone who lived in a home that was on your property but got knocked down and you built over it or somebody built over it. So these are the type of ghosts where you'll see them walking through walls, walking up stairways that don't exist, and it's because they're in their old home. So there really are doorways that they're walking through, not your wall. There really is a staircase, even though you don't see it, that they're walking up. And the fact of the matter is that they're residing in that reality, and so they don't even know you exist. And you will never be able to get rid of them because they have no idea you're there, but they also won't interact with you. They won't hurt you. They won't do anything. They're just there. The third one she found was construction ghosts, and that's when somebody's renovating their home, and they generally are either very happy that you're keeping their home up because they don't want to see it knocked down, or they're very angry because they're wondering why you would change their perfect home. And these ghosts are the ones that hide or move tools, or building supplies, knock over ladders, or basically try to creep out people who are renovating the house. And they tend to disappear, after the renovations are over. Then there's the thing that you were referring to, haunted objects. And if your listeners like to go to flea markets and antique stores and get really cool jewelry or toys or furniture or clothing, and they bring it home, and suddenly there's paranormal activity in the home, and it's in the room where that object is. Well, your object may be haunted, and there's only one way to get rid of that ghost, and guess what it is? You have to get rid of that object. And the fifth one, which is totally new to me, I had never heard this one before I researched it, I kind of refer to as ghost magnets. These are people who tend to exude a type of energy that attracts ghosts. So they may be there may be paranormal activity in their home, and they go, well, that's it, I'm moving. The next time they go to, there's still paranormal activity. And it doesn't matter how many times they move, there's paranormal activity because they're haunted, not the places. And these people have to learn, if they want to remain sane, to basically let these ghosts or spirits know that, hey, this is the time when I will communicate with you, and this is the time where you can't bother me.
Right.
Well, okay, so in the book, and I read the second one, cover to cover in one evening.
Thank you.
Most of it's fascinating. I really couldn't put it down. But most of the experiences that were mentioned in the book seem to be pleasant, non-threatening. And I think in terms of like the Home Sweet Home ghost. But have you come across any experiences that were not so nice?
Yes, I can tell you a story about that. And I want to preface it by saying, in my opinion, based on the research I've done and the people I've interviewed, I would say that the majority of experiences that are paranormal are comforting and loving and supportive, and that the scary stuff and the negative stuff, it's out there, okay? But it's, I feel, the minority of the things that are out there. So having said that, I'm going to tell you a scary story. This is a young lady I interviewed in England. Her name is Lee, and this happened to her and her family when she was 16 years old. They moved to a rented home in Tunstall, which is in northern England, south of Manchester, for those who know the geography. And what they didn't realize when they moved there was that there was something sinister in their basement. Now, most of their storage was in the basement, and when Lee was helping her parents load boxes in the cellar, which most people do when they first move, it can take years, if ever, to unpack boxes, she told her parents, hey, I don't want to go down here anymore because, you know what, I have a bad feeling about this space. And, her parents looked at her like she was a little bit crazy, but they said, listen, it's the basement, we're just storing things. If you don't want to go down here, you don't have to go down here. However, one day she ended up being sent down there anyway by her younger brother. They were playing a game called Truth or Dare, and her brother said, I dare you to go downstairs. She lost, by the way. So her brother said, I dare you to go down to the basement and no flashlight allowed. Well, of course, we all know we can't back down when our sibling dares us. That's something, particularly when we're kids. So she steeled herself, and she descended into the basement, and despite the lack of lighting, she spied a dark figure sitting on one of the boxes. And she reacted, I think, in much the same way I would. She screamed and raced back up the stairs. She said to her brother, there's someone in the basement. I don't want to go down there again. And her brother got a flashlight because he was like, oh, please, went down into the basement and saw nothing. So after that, Lee said, okay, that's it. Never go into the basement again. Unfortunately, this is like a horror story. Her parents, unaware of what she had seen because she didn't really tell them. Asked her one day to go down and retrieve something from the basement. I think they were giving a party and they needed a punch bowl, and hey, could you go down there and get it for us? So she wasn't going to tell them what happened. She just went down, found the box quickly, turned, and she saw the figure again with a woman in his arms. She looked like she was dead. He laid her on the floor and started digging a hole. She just kind of ran right back upstairs again. That was like enough for her. She didn't say anything to her parents, but she made sure that the basement door was tight shut that evening before she went to bed. Later that night, she heard a scratching noise in the house that made her jump. She went over to the basement door and found it open. When she looked at the door and walls, there were scratch marks everywhere. And she thought, well, what's causing that? Her brother saw the scratch marks all over the door, too, and he decided to go down and check it out. And he saw someone in the basement. Now, finally, he believed her. They both tried to talk to their parents about it, but, as they said in their wonderful British accents, they would have none of it. So, one afternoon, she did something that I would not recommend to your listeners that they ever do, but when people are 16, they do crazy stuff. She was alone in the house, and she decided to communicate with the entity in the basement with a Ouija board. So she said, I know, it just gets like better and better, doesn't it? She says, whoever's in the basement, tell me your name. So it spelled out the name Mark. So she went to the local library, and she decided to do some research looking at, the old newspapers of the area to find out if there was a person named Mark who lived in the area. And what she found, that there was a man named Mark Thomas who lived in the house in 1917. He brutally murdered his girlfriend and buried her in the basement. She saw a photo of the girlfriend, and the woman looked eerily like herself.
Wow.
Wow. Wow.
What amazes me is that this stuff creeps her out, but it doesn't frighten her. That would be it. You'd have to take me away. I just couldn't handle that.
Many. I have a story that is sort of not similar to that, but similar in the idea that I had seen a vision, never knew anybody who had died in my home, and then found out from the neighbor afterwards that somebody did die, and I described this person to a T, and she had lived in the neighborhood for 50 years, and she said that was him. I saw him. He was a young gentleman, married, and fell down the stairs in the home here, and I described him to a T, and so I had never known anything. So it may be that she was sort of validated, and that sort of diminished the fear and the scariness of it, and maybe gave her a little bit more confidence. But that is a scary story.
Yeah, that she tends to have scary stories. There's 2 or 3 of them in the book. And I believe she's a ghost magnet. I believe she's the type of person where wherever she moves, there will be ghosts.
Well, many psychics that we've spoken to, that Lucy and I have spoken to, say that everyone in the world has the ability. It's just that we haven't been able to sort of tap into it or connect with the gift.
Let me speak to that. As someone who has no psychic ability, let me speak to that. Okay?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, being married to a psychic, do you believe that to be true?
Well, this is what I believe, and it's only a belief. Who knows? But my feeling is this. And I like to use a metaphor. We are all born with the ability to sing, but some people are born with a little bit more talent, like Pavarotti or Barbra Streisand or Christina Aguilera, and all of us can try to improve our voices. I'm not saying we can't do that, but I don't care how many voice lessons I take, I will never sound like Barbra Streisand. I will never sound like Christina. It's the same thing with psychic ability. Some people are born with these brain energy antennas that are so amazingly sensitive, and they just start off like from birth being incredibly psychic. And other people really study it and try to get better at it, and they maybe develop their awareness a little bit. But I honestly think that everyone who's ever said to me, everyone is psychic, everyone can do this, is someone who's very psychic. It's like somebody who has an amazing singing voice saying everyone can sing. I just think there's a little naivete there.
Well, did you talked about earlier about psychics becoming psychic after some sort of traumatic experience? Had your husband have that, or is that something that was given down to him?
he inherited it. His grandmother from Italy was unbelievably psychic. I have a lot of stories about that in the first book. His aunt is psychic. His mother, it skipped her. It does skip generations sometimes. His younger brother is psychic. There's just a lot of it in the family. It's everywhere. And I do believe that they have that more evolved, more sensitive brain energy antenna.
Well, do you think that psychic experiences have a meaning or a purpose in life?
I think they can. I mean, it's kind of funny. People ask me, are psychics more spiritual? And the answer to that is, well, maybe. You have the opportunity, if you are psychic, to see things that make you realize that it's not just this world. And so you have the opportunity to become more spiritual, but not necessarily. Some people don't. Some people become egotistical, instead, and money grabbing. But
right.
I hope I answered that. I think I wandered off, but
no, that was perfectly well said.
Okay.
No, that it makes sense. But you know what? I want to ask you this. Now, at this point in your life, what do you believe after writing these books and listening to people, and where do you feel that we go after we die? Or what happens to us? Do you have an opinion on that?
Sure, and I think that it's not really inconsistent with science, because if you look at field theory in physics, the basic theory is that the entire universe is one big energy field, and energy does not die. It converts into something different. So if that's the case, then our energy probably doesn't die. It just converts into a different form. So I think it's quite credible that we might survive death. To me, that makes sense. I've also seen such crazy things like, the funeral, what happened with my father and things like that, that I would have to be in a huge state of denial to say that it's impossible that people survive death. I think it's quite possible.
Go ahead, Liz.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go.
Well, you know what? There has to be one story that you've written about or heard that involves the paranormal that just made you sit at the edge of your seat and was completely shocked. Can you recall a story like that?
Well, I guess the most shocking story to me, it's not as dramatic as the one I just told, but it was shocking because of what this woman did as a child and what she did as an adult. There's a woman who's a school teacher that I wrote about. Her name is Denise. And Denise was incredibly psychic. She came from a long line of Irish psychics, and the Irish and Italians seem to have a monopoly on this. And when she was a child, she lived across the street from a graveyard. And she used to go across the street every day and play with a kid there who had died in a fire. Okay? She saw this kid just like we would see, a real flesh and blood child. And her friend used to always tell her how much she missed her mother. And when Denise grew up, she decided, just for her own sanity, to research that particular cemetery to find out if there really was a little girl who died in a fire. And what she found was that not only was there a little girl who died in that fire, but her father, her grandmother, and her siblings died in the fire. There was only one family member who survived, and that was her mother.
Wow.
I just found that fascinating. I mean, the fact that a child could go out and play with a dead kid every day was fascinating enough. But the fact that she validated it as an adult, to me, was pretty cool.
Amazing.
Well, Louisa, what would you like your readers to take away from your books?
I think I'd like them to take away that we live in a fascinating world, and yes, there's a lot of things that we see on the news that are upsetting, and hey, turn off the television. But I think that this is an amazing world we live in, and you should be open to any possibilities. I think that all of us, based on people I've interviewed over the past, decade, I think all of us are surrounded by an entourage of relatives, friends, and guides who adore us. They love us. They want the best for us. They're there to comfort us. They're there to celebrate with us. And even when you feel alone, you're not. You're never really alone. They're all around you, and they really love you and care about you. And that's just, to me, such a comforting and uplifting thing, an awareness to have.
It's beautiful, and it's true. It's absolutely true. But Louisa, it has been a delight to speak with you tonight. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you and pick up your books?
Well, I have a website, and it's www.psychicbystander.com.
Excellent. Well, you know what, everyone, I highly suggest that you go out there and pick up Louisa's books, Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country and Loitering at the Gate to Eternity. Go ahead and check out Louisa's website, psychicbystander.com. And Louisa, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we hope to have you back on when you release your next book.
Oh, well, I would be delighted, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Louisa. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. Louisa Oakley Green, Undiscovered Country.
I like her.
I like her too.
Her because she has like that, like she said, she's not psychic, but yet she has like that scientific edge that you can see where the openness is there. It's not the one-sided, and it's not the, well, there's no explanation, so therefore it isn't. And I really like that.
But, I sort of, in speaking with her, but also, too, in doing some research about her life and in the books that she's written, I sort of relate to her a little bit more than I've ever done with anybody else in the paranormal field. And I guess you sort of could see it in the way that when we were speaking, when I was speaking with her and asking questions, we sort of agreed a lot on a lot of points within the paranormal. And I find that interesting, and I find that to be a little bit refreshing because I can relate to her experiences and to her ideas and theories about the paranormal, but also to have the mindset that, listen, we live in reality, and we don't know all of the answers yet. It is okay to leave things open-ended. We don't need to have an answer or a definitive side to one thing just because we don't know what the answers are. People say, and I have to admit though, to this day, I have experienced spirits, and I have communicated with ghosts, and I've been in haunted locations where things have happened. I still, to this day, do not know where they are residing, where it is that they are coming from. So I understand that to me, I believe there is an afterlife. What that word afterlife means, I think that definition is up to interpretation and up to a discovery of a meaning for, because I still don't know what it is. And I'm not talking about whether it's religious or not. I'm just talking about what area, what space, what mass does that afterlife take up, and where is it coming from? I think that, to me, is the ultimate question, not a matter of whether or not it exists, because I know something exists. What exactly it is, I don't know. Is it, out in the ether? Is it another dimension? Is it a parallel universe? Is it something that we just don't even know yet, can't even put a word to it to explain or define it? Is it, beyond the means of our interpretation at this point? There's so many questions that I have. I mean, I understand that there is something there, but what it is, I don't know yet. I don't know what that is. And so there's still that skeptical side of me that is going to question what that afterlife is. And that doesn't mean that I don't believe in it. It's just that in order to find the answer, you have to question it. You have to question until you get to the root of the point that you're trying to get.
Well, maybe I'm the naive one, because I do believe in it. And I like that she mentioned consciousness, okay? And kind of like my my idea about the afterlife is really kind of evolving, to this consciousness that, yes, we have this consciousness when this body ends, when this body ceases to be, that consciousness is still there. So these spirits that we're in contact with, their bodies aren't here anymore, but yet their consciousness remains. So part of me wants to think that because their consciousness is there, they're still seeing something. They're still experiencing something. What it is, I don't know, and I don't understand that part of it. But I'm hoping that while I'm still on this side, I can understand what it is. I mean, I know, like we've said it before, we won't have the answer till we get to the other side. But yet there's a part of me that really wants to hope that we can understand what that consciousness is. Now, psychic ability, is it that consciousness that's reaching outside of our brains? Like she said, it's outside of our brains. Could psychic ability, how do I put this without sounding, could psychic ability almost be like our own ghosts manifesting themselves while we're still here? Could it be something like that?
I think to touch on that point and to expand on it a little bit more, and I don't want to pontificate, and seem as though I'm preaching. I believe, my belief is that the answers that we are trying to search for, all the paranormal investigators and researchers that are out there, I think really need to refocus and look at consciousness. I think that is the best start to understanding the paranormal, because I think that is where the answers could lie. I don't know for sure, but I definitely agree with Louisa, and I have definitely done much research, especially because I've written the book on consciousness. And, when she was talking about the University of Virginia and Dr. Grayson, I knew all of those stories, and all of them are just amazing to the point that you can't deny that there is something to consciousness out there. Now, what you were just talking about, could consciousness be, what did you say? How did you describe it? What consciousness was?
Like, consciousness could be like our own ghosts, like
right, okay.
our own being, our own essence that's coming out of this life and maybe expanding into the universe.
When I had written my book and all the research that I have done, what I've come at this point to the conclusion of, not that I shouldn't say conclusion, because that means that there's an end, and there's no end to that answer yet. But what I've reached at this point with consciousness is that consciousness is the essence of who we are. Consciousness is what I believe people call the soul. That is our being. That's the light within us. And when Louisa was talking about, people with dementia and suddenly recalling things and getting their memory back, or being able to, there's one story, I think it's in Germany, where one woman was on her deathbed and her son was sitting next to her. And for years, she had not been able to recall his name or the family, or hadn't been able to speak coherently at all. And all of a sudden, she rose out of the bed, sat up, and recited a poem to her son. And she said, she named her son, I forgot what his name was, and said, I want to tell you a poem. I want to recite a poem to you. She recited a poem to the T. It must have been something that she may have read or studied in years past, laid back on the bed, and passed away. Now, that to me is unbelievable, and that to me is the idea that there is this consciousness that is within you that has broken away from your physical entity, your physical body, and that now consciousness is in the in-between stages of the physical realm and going into whatever the afterlife is, the ether, the next dimension, whatever it is. And that is what is now controlling the body. And when she laid back down and passed away, that consciousness, that energy and that light within her was able to be exhumed out of her and went off. That is what I believe is what propels you on your journey in this life. That is what leads you. That is what guides you. That is what what I think also, too, is the intuition. It's that inner mind talking to you. I think it's that consciousness. It's the you in you that's telling you things because it has a two-way radio to the other side. It has already that communication. And that's why people say all the time, well, you have the ability to speak to spirits. You have the ability to be psychic. You have those abilities, of course, because everybody has consciousness in them. And the consciousness is that bridge that's in between this physical realm and the ever after or the beyond, whatever you want to call it. It is that bridge, and so we already contain it. It's just a matter of whether or not those frequencies are tapped into, or if, I'm reading this book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, which is really interesting because what that book talks about is psychedelic drugs and the ayahuasca and all these things that create an experience within you, and what they're saying is that it sort of taps into that consciousness so that you're able to see your past lives, talk to spirits, do remote viewing, all of these things that your consciousness has the ability to do, but you physically are not able to experience it because it's not connecting, or your consciousness is not allowing you to see it because you shouldn't be able to see that at this point. There's so much to consciousness that I think people are neglecting it, and I think that's where paranormal investigators and researchers need to focus on and to learn more about scientifically, medically, not just sort of paranormal side, but get into the science of consciousness, because I think as of right now also too, science is turning the tables and closing the books on the old chapters that they believed about consciousness, and they're opening up a new one on it, and they're learning a lot more that I think are fascinating them in the science field, but it should be overwhelming to us within the paranormal field to learn more about. I highly recommend people start to research more about consciousness, because I think not only is it going to discover or reveal to you what could possibly be the afterlife, but I think it reveals to you who you are as a person, and who you want to be, and how consciousness can actually help you be the person that you truly are in this world, and not feel as though you're alone anymore.
Well, I agree with that. And then, when you're talking about the DMT and ayahuasca and all that, see, the thing that I see when, people describe what happens then, to me it's like there has to be a series of triggers that open up these doors that keep us on this side of the consciousness. And once those doors are open, regardless if it is something like ayahuasca or something like DMT, or it could just be simple meditation, but the keys are the doors that open, doors of perception, the doors that open that allow your consciousness as it is now get into the other side. And once those are open, because you're talking about consciousness does not have the restrictions of a physical body. It is free. It is energy. It moves. It can go back and forth. Once we find these triggers that opens these doors, I think it's going to be absolutely amazing what we will learn. And I think that's part of it. Now, the other thing I think about a lot is like, okay, when we paranormal investigate, you know for a fact, you say you're not psychic, but I know you know when someone is near. You can feel that. You can, it's almost like when, and the one thing I can think about is when we went to Penhurst. We're in this main room, and I could feel that guy in the hallway. I could feel him. I knew he was there. For some reason, we couldn't see him, but he was there. And I know you felt him. That's, I think, is part of our consciousness, and that door opening just a little to be aware of this other consciousness, this other energy. It's not just going in and looking for a ghost. It is more experiencing the whole thing. It is opening up that third eye that you have within you, that we all have within you. It's opening that up and allowing this other consciousness to make contact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're getting to the understanding of what I believe consciousness is. And I'm just reading chat, and Carol and Abby had just mentioned something there, and she wrote, I always wonder why spirits, et cetera, never really can answer what the afterlife is. I may not have the percentage correct, but I think we as humans are only tapping into 10% of the usage of our brain. I mean, just think about that for a minute right now. We're only utilizing, I think it's 10% of our brain right now. And so I think the reason why, and this is just my opinion, why spirits have not been able to fully explain what the afterlife is because I don't think we can comprehend it at this point. I don't think we have the ability to understand what the afterlife is because we have not been able to fully tap into, number one, 100% of our brain, but not only that, we're not able to fully tap into our consciousness, which I think we're not even allowed to at this point. I don't know if allowed is the right word, but I don't think we're able to tap into the consciousness and be able to get that understanding and that knowledge to understand what the afterlife is. And I think when we get answers from spirits that say, oh, I'm in heaven, or I'm in another dimension, there's all these different answers that spirits give us all the time, and so it always makes us wonder, well, where are we? Where do we go? Is it heaven? Is it another dimension? I think they're answering to the people that the best answer that they're able to comprehend at that moment. I think they're given descriptions that we as humans can understand and possibly interpret. I think if they actually sat there and explained what it is, honestly, this may sound funny, but I think our heads would explode because the ability to try to understand what that is so far beyond what we can do that our brains would just start to smoke and overload. And so I believe that. I think that could be a possibility and a theory. I could be completely wrong. But that's my understanding at this point, and that's where I'm sort of laying my trust on and then going from there. And so, that's the foundation, but I'm only piling more research and more research on top of that to try and figure out whether or not that's true and or whether or not there's another direction that I need to go in. And so that, to me, could be the reasons why that we don't know what the afterlife is or that we'll never know what the afterlife is. It's because we're not able to tap into the ability to understand and comprehend what it actually is. And we only will know that once we do cross over, become the consciousness that has all of that knowledge. People always say that spirits that we talk to, and I see a lot of people online too who tap in and use the Ouija board to tap into people that they've known in their lives who ask 1,000,001 questions about everything from past to future to present and trying to find answers about everything. And it always amazes me that there's a bunch of these spirits that just know almost every single thing in the world. And, they may have just died not too long ago. How is this knowledge acquired? How do they receive it? And I think the consciousness already has it. I think it's already there. We may be that antenna that Louisa was talking about, that the antenna just automatically receives it. It's like a magnet. All of this knowledge gets to the consciousness. We're not able to tap into it until we pass. And when we pass, we've gained it already. We've got it. So we've got all the answers. So we know it all at that point, and we're experiencing it at the moment that we know it. And that's kind of weird to understand as well. It's almost like a deja vu type of thing. We already know the knowledge, but yet we're experiencing it at the same time that we know it. So it sort of amazes you at the same time for me. But that's my theory.
See, what I'm picturing is that, like what you're saying is that in my mind it's like, okay, the consciousness as we know it right now in this plane, on this plane, it's very restricted. We're only allowed to see or experience what is here. But see, I go back to think about shaman, indigenous people. They have always used some sort of, the DMT,
ayahuasca.
the ayahuasca, these natural herbs and whatever you want to call it, to open up that doorway. And if for some reason they are able to go on to that other side, they are able to kind of see what's there. And it's always been where you have to be a shaman, you have to be trained, or you have to be aware of what is there, what you can experience. That's why not everybody would always do it. I mean, you look at some of these tribes, and not the whole tribe will be doing this. Only the shaman, the elders, or someone who is trained in it. So that goes with your theory that, if we knew all of this, our brains would explode. I believe that. I believe that there's so much knowledge that's possible that, we can't comprehend it, that we're not ready to. But I think, yes, there are some people that have become so aware of what is possibly out there that, yes, they're ready to accept it. They're able to comprehend it. Maybe not totally, but to a point. So I think this could be something that we can aspire to open up our own consciousness, to prepare ourselves for those answers. Because I think those answers are so massive and so huge that, we're not ready. We're not ready for it. I think we're getting towards it, and I think it's happening. I think the more we become open and aware of the possibilities of what our brains can do or what we can experience, I think we'll move closer to it, but I really don't think everybody's ready.
When we talk about consciousness and the whole idea of afterlife and how that relates, it goes, excuse me, it always goes back to what I was mentioning before to Louisa about, the question mark that I always have, or the uncertainty of belief within the idea of past life. And so, if we have and we contain this consciousness and we pass over, we become this consciousness energy, this field, whatever it is, and we pass on to the quote-unquote afterlife, whatever it is. What is the need then to return back to a physical realm to experience life again if we've already gained the knowledge within the consciousness that is already contained in us? And so not that I'm questioning the idea that it exists or not, past life, I'm just questioning what the purpose would be to have to come back down to the physical realm to relearn, re-educate, relive, whatever it is that we're meant to do to learn a lesson or to receive the light of something that we missed in the past life when we've already contained, or it had already been contained within the consciousness that we currently own. So that's always left a question mark. I mean, and that's what I was mentioning earlier to Louisa, that I don't know how that fits into the paranormal. That's always been sort of that puzzle that just I can never find the spot on the piece that is able to fit. So that's always been a question mark for me, and how past life works into this whole genre.
See, my understanding, though, is that it's unfinished business. Like she said, a lot of those kids that had the memories had their lives ended traumatically. The previous life was ended traumatically. So I think maybe, yes, there is a path that we should be following. And if that path, if something takes you off that path, you don't finish the purpose that you have, I think this is why people remain. Why do we have the spirits that remain in the home? Why do we have the spirits that cling to a location or to a person? Because their purpose was not finished. Their job wasn't done. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I think, yes, they'll move on into the light once they finish that job. Now, there's a lot of spirits out there that very possibly don't realize they're dead. They don't realize that they've moved on to the other side. And they're still searching to finish that job. I mean,
well, then the question arises then, why didn't they become reincarnated and be able to live again?
I don't know. I don't know. Why is it that certain consciousness, certain spirits, certain souls come back in a child? I don't know. See, now there's the other thing about karma. Like when you talk about karma, and you have to work off your karma. Maybe it'll take a few lifetimes to work that off. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's so many theories about this that I don't understand. I mean, it's like all this one big thing, and I can take some from here and some from here. It doesn't, I don't know, it's like the answer doesn't lie within one set of thinking or one culture or one idea. It's kind of like what I'm getting here is a little from everything, and it's kind of like falling into place. Like I have this big giant puzzle of 1,000 pieces, and all these pieces are on the table, and I'm able to gather. I've got this part of it together, and I've got the top part together, but I can't get all of the pieces together to finish the picture. That's what it feels like to me right now.
I think it's because, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, I think. We're only using a small percentage of our brain's ability and the power that, we've been bestowed. So I think there's just a lot more learning. Who knows, maybe in 100 or 500 years from now, when they talk about raising your consciousness, maybe that rise in consciousness will help rise the percentage of how much we can use of our own physical brain, and therefore possibly answer more questions to things or have the ability to do more things that we weren't able to do before. I'm not saying that what we've just talked about for the last, 30 minutes or so, is the truth and is the answer to anything. It's a healthy dialogue that Lucy and I get into usually after a guest comes on the show, not to debate anything, but to talk about it a little bit more and put it into a perspective that we think, based on the research and the experiences that we've had, that hopefully would then lend itself to relating to our listeners. And I love that our listeners just question things. Why is this? Why is that? I love that. Keep doing that. Don't just settle for an answer. Or if, there's something that you are unsure of, don't just accept my word for it. Don't accept Lucy's word for it or anybody else. Question it. And you'd be amazed at how much you yourself can actually uncover just by a little bit of Googling or, a little bit of research if a library still exists in your neighborhood, a little bit of research that you can uncover from authors like Louisa and, other folks, other lesser-known folks that are diligently trying to figure things out but may not have all the right answers. But you yourself putting this all together may lend itself a little bit more of a pleasant surprise that you weren't aware of before. And so that's why Lucy and I always say that research is the number one thing that we hope any and all paranormal investigators, researchers, hobbyists, whatever you want to call yourself, if you do the research and really look things up, and, just for an example, if you are new to listening to the show, I'm not just talking about researching what is in plain sight. I'm sort of talking about, yes, I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking about the ability and the idea that just questioning things that are even below what you see right in front of your face. And for an example, when Lucy and I go to a location to investigate, yes, we do the research of the town, the home, the family, or whoever, or the people that lived in the house. Now, just to remind everybody, we don't do residential investigations. We go to abandoned places of that nature. But we do the research and the history and find the knowledge within all of those areas. But what we also do is do the research of the land itself. We go back in time to as much as we can get to when that land was first settled upon, or even prior to that. Learning more about the indigenous people that lived in that area to try and figure out whether or not their culture itself lends any answers to what is being experienced today. And in doing so, I know I've been amazed, and I know Lucy has been amazed by the things that we've been able to uncover. But what that does to help the communication goes so much further. And it allows, what I think, the spirits to be able to be comfortable with you because they know that you've done the homework, or you have some of the answers, or some of the things that you're saying to them, it triggers a memory for them that they can be able to familiarize themselves with you and then go ahead and speak with you. So that's the sort of research that I'm talking about, but I'm also talking about even further than that. But that's just one step, and that's the idea that Lucy and I abide by, and we take that in our personal lives. I know I do, and then I also take that within the paranormal field itself.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like when you go into a location, you have this ghost consciousness that's there. So by the things that you have found, the land, the things that are pertinent to this consciousness, that seems to make that connection. And I want to say, I know we have been fortunate enough to always make some kind of connection. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we go beyond just, okay, we're just going to a location. We do the research into the land. We do the research into the backstory. It's not just what's there. We go farther back. So there's got to be something within that consciousness of this soul or this person that's there, that when they hear it or when they see it or when they know that you know about it, they're going to respond. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think that maybe we would all be more successful in contact if we go that little bit extra and dig a little bit further. I think that has a lot to do with it.
You know, Lucy and I have this debate, and she just mentioned it earlier, that she puts the title on me as psychic, and I don't. I don't do that at all. Not that I don't believe myself to be psychic, or I don't believe in the idea of being psychic. I don't see it in myself, but I do have that intuition. I do have the feelings more so than other people. I do have the visuals or I don't know if it's the data or information or knowledge that comes to me whenever I'm around people, whenever I'm around places or things. You know, Lucy is slowly starting to believe me more when I tell her that, I can get a good impression from someone just by meeting them in the first 5 minutes, and I'm able to say this guy or this girl is out for no good. Don't trust them, don't open up, or anything like that. And Lucy is such a good-hearted person. It's not that she doesn't believe me, it's that she wants to believe that everybody is good, and so she will then entrust them. And then, most of the time or some of the time gets hurt in the process when she then realizes that I was sort of right. But is that psychic? I don't know. Is that an intuition? I don't know. Is it the idea that my consciousness is brighter, and so my antenna for my consciousness is higher or is able to receive more? I don't know. I know a lot of people that are able to do the same thing that I can, that, right off the bat can tell a person within the first 5 minutes, or can feel the essence of the person without even hearing them speak, can feel the essence of a person if they're in the same presence of them, and get an understanding of their personality and their traits within that first 5, 10, 15 minutes or so. Is it because that we've tapped into our consciousness more, or that we've opened it more? I don't know. Louisa talked about people who are psychic are susceptible to a lot of medical conditions like migraines and a lot of other things. In the last 10 years, my migraines have increased, tripled, quadrupled in the amount of migraines that I have. Is it because I am learning more about the paranormal and tapping into not psychic area, but tapping into the consciousness area that is facilitating those abilities and then causing these, physical side effects? I don't know. I don't know that answer. I can only tell you what I've experienced and how I'm living my life right now. And so those are the questions that I continually try to find the answers to. But it's funny because as I try to find the answers more and more, I'm getting more of those traits more and more. I'm getting more of those headaches more and more. So it's sort of like an endless, loop that just keeps going.
That's because you are triggering those doors. You are slowly opening those doors, maybe not through drugs or anything like that. But I think the more that you research, I think maybe somehow within your own consciousness, you're opening those doors. And the more the doors open, the more susceptible you are to the headaches and all of that. I mean, you are right. I mean, I have those same feelings. I mean, I can pick up on things, but again, it's probably the naive in me that I don't want to accept it. I want to accept that everyone is basically good. And I'm always, 9 times out of 10, I'm always going to get hurt by that. And it usually happens. I want to trust people. But I think you're doing it in a much more healthier way. You have that you listen to it, and I know I have the psychic ability, but sometimes I still question it in myself, where I think you, on the other hand, are doing it maybe in a more educational way, a more scientific way. By the research that you're doing, you're opening these doors. See, one of the things I was thinking about when we started talking about the ayahuasca and that, I thought about Timothy Leary, okay, back in the 60s, tune in, tune out, with the LSD and all that. Okay, so by taking the LSD, they were saying that they were expanding their consciousness, they were expanding their awareness. Okay, that awareness, could psychic ability actually be us opening our consciousness without using, some of us don't use the drugs or whatever, open that up, whereas some people who really don't have it on a daily basis or are not really aware of it, by using the drugs or using some mind-altering substance, they're almost like manually opening those doors, as opposed to the ones that have the antenna that's already up, that are born with it like that. Then we have the other people that don't really have that antenna out, but by using a different substance, they're manually opening those doors. So kind of goes back to, maybe the naive statement that I believe that everyone has this ability. I really do believe everyone has it.
Well, you're talking about physically altering your brain. Yeah, you're physically altering your brain to be able to push it aside and connect more with the consciousness. And that goes with what Louisa was talking about earlier, about, the psychic in Long Island who had a traumatic near-death experience and then became psychic afterwards. She talked about another one who fell off the ladder, hit his head, and then became psychic afterwards. That's physically altering your state of consciousness, and what that possibly is doing is triggering the effect to tap into it more, and that's what psychedelic drugs and LSDs and ayahuasca, all of that does as well. You're physically altering that state so that you're able to tap into it more.
You're manually opening those doors.
Right. You're physically doing that, and then that's when I had mentioned to Louisa, and that I'm learning about more and more, is autism, and how autism, physically at birth, what I believe is your brain is being affected. And so is that opening up the consciousness more, but at an earlier stage when the conflict of just learning the basic abilities to survive on this planet, the basic abilities of eating and breathing and walking and talking, learning all of those, as well as having a much more open consciousness than anybody else in the world, is that what autism is all about? And there is a study, and I got to find it somewhere, where they are linking, or they're possibly linking, the idea of autism with this higher consciousness, with indigo children. I know everybody's heard about indigo children, and believing that these young children understand more, that their awareness is much higher, that they're able to see more of things that we don't see. And I'm not talking about the invisible world or anything like that, but I think they're able to visually understand and see things a lot clearer than we, as either kids at that age or even adults 20, 30, 40 years older than them can have the ability to do. And so is autism the struggle between trying to just learn the basics, but at the same time having a higher consciousness or more open consciousness, and their physical bodies trying to mesh the two together to be able to function in this society? And is that where autism, is that what autism is all about? So it's really interesting to understand what that link is, and whether or not that there is some effect in that, because I think that could possibly be where many of the answers to the paranormal is all about.
Well, as a whole, I tend to believe that children in general have that openness, because I don't think they've learned to close those doors. I think that maybe we are born with these doors open. I think as a child, I think they're much more open. So when, the stories about the children and the imaginary friends, I honestly believe that they can make that connection to whatever is on the other side, because they haven't learned to close those doors. As we get older, we're taught that, oh, it's not real, oh, it's just your imagination. But I think children in general, not just the autistic children, the autistic children may be more gifted because of the physical things that have happened to the brain, but I also think as a whole, children may have their doors open. And as we grow up, as we get older, we're kind of like taught to close those doors. So now we have, a lot of us, as we're older, we're trying to reopen those doors, but we've forgotten how to connect.
I'm not sure if I agree with you on that our consciousness is much more open when we're younger. I think we're not what's the right word? Diluted is not the word. I'm trying to think. We're not as as you mentioned before, we're not as closed-minded as we are as an adult than we are as we're not closed-minded as children as we are as adults. And so, we haven't been infected by culture and society and organized things, whether it's institutions, schools, and doctrines into religion or any of that stuff. We're a lot freer to think more at a younger age. But I don't know. It's a hard struggle for me at this point right now to try and link the two. I think it's a really great concept to try and understand what autism is all about, and not feed children tons of drugs because you're labeling something as autistic. It may on the surface seem better, but I'm just leery about the whole idea of drugging kids up like that, because we don't fully understand what autism is all about. And I think what it's doing is actually creating these young children to be adults at such an early age, because you're trying to make them more closed-minded so that they can focus more. But is that the right way? I don't know. I don't think so. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm with you on that, but that doesn't mean that I completely disagree with your thoughts.
Well, see, and I only think in terms of like, children now. Every time that they seem to have some kind of behavioral problems, they want to put them on some kind of drug. They want to give them a drug to make them behave. I'm not sure what the names are because I really don't believe in them. But I think we're doing a disservice to our own children by trying to drug them, trying to make them behave when, growing up, I mean, boys were boys, kids were kids. Kids would act out. It's a normal part of growing up. But yet now, as a society, we look at our children as, well, they've got ADD and they need to be drugged and they need to do this. I think we are making little zombies of our children because we're giving them those kind of drugs. I think that's totally unnecessary. I think it's wrong, and I think it's scary. That's one thing that really does bother me.
Well, I think, again, we're not medical scientists and we're not doctors. So,
No.
We don't know the full history of the medical conditions that are out there. But I think it's just, just for the point of saying that, just because these children on the outside may seem not normal is not a bad thing. Not normal could mean that they could be better than us. Everybody says that the paranormal is not normal, but to us, we believe it's the truth. It's the answers that we've all been searching for, that people have sort of negated all along, but need to open up to more. Is that the same condemnation that we're putting on these children that are afflicted with the quote unquotes all over the medical journals? Does that have, just because it may not be the norm, does it mean that it's bad? Could it be that it's even better than what we consider to be normal? And that's what I was getting to before, is autistic, meaning that our consciousness is more open. To me, that's much better. That's a much better life than I'm living right now. If that's not normal, then I want to be not normal. Then, if that's the case. So, again, we're not doctors, and we're not in the medical field, so I can't attest to what we were talking about here. We're just throwing these ideas and theories out there to question, to be able to question things and do more research on, to find out if there is any truth to any of the theories that we're talking about. And I'm sure everybody who's listening right now has either thought about this or may strongly believe in an opinion about certain things, and that is so healthy. It is so healthy. But all I want to do is suggest to people that even if you do have a strong belief in something, I think it's so healthy to still keep an open mind for the ability to accept other opinions and other theories, because I've learned in my life that I've been so stubborn in certain situations that it was always that, no, it can't be that. No, because I know this to be true. And it wasn't until I started to get into the paranormal a lot more that I started to question myself on why I believed it so much, or why was I so stubborn in the fact that I would negate everybody else and say that my idea was the truth. And it opened up so much for me that it actually allows me to not only learn more about the paranormal, but be open more to the paranormal, but also, too, in my life that I'm living, it's actually helped me live my life. It's actually helped in my work life, my social life, all these other areas, that it's just made me so much of a better person that, it's funny because I've had so many friends in my life, and I've been so stubborn, and I've lost a lot of people. And so I've started to sort of change things around in my life while going through the paranormal, that, now my friends list is, a lot smaller now. And so, if I wasn't that way earlier, where would my life be? And I've learned so much just from the paranormal, how to live my life. And that's why, again, as I was talking to Louisa before, the paranormal, as we learn about the paranormal, it's not just learning about the paranormal. It's about learning your life, learning about who you are, and how you live your life, how you live amongst other people, your culture in your town, your home, your apartment or your neighborhood, as small and local as that is. The paranormal helps you see things a lot better within your own life and sort of changes things a little bit in the way that you perceive the living and how you interact with the living and how you conduct your timeline on this planet for however many more years you have. The paranormal helps guide you that way, and it actually puts things into better perspective than you would never have thought of before ever doing any research in the paranormal.
I love how you say that. See, to me, the paranormal has always been the norm. It has always been normal. I've always known that there is something else beyond what we're here. But I never really researched it. I just kind of accepted it. And now at this point in my life, with all the research that we do and delving into the paranormal and trying to make connections, it's like putting everything into a nice package where I'm getting more understanding. The things that I accepted before without really knowing what they are, I'm developing an understanding of it. And I love it. I love it. I mean, it's this constant learning that just keeps going and going. And the thing I really, really enjoyed about this book, and I enjoyed about talking to Louisa, it's the connection between psychic ability and the paranormal. Some people tend to think of them as two separate things. But no, it's not really. I mean, when we're investigating, we are touching into that psychic ability. We are making that connection. Our consciousness is making contact with their consciousness. It is like this big web that's all connected. And that's one thing that we've said as we go along. Everything has this little invisible web that is connecting everything, and I love it. The more I get into it, the more I'm learning, and the more I'm learning that, there is a line that may go to here and may go to there, and hopefully someday I'll be able to make a basket. Right now I've got all the components, but I haven't put it together yet.
Krista Anderson in chat has such a great question that I just want to mention. I'm not going to get into it because that's a whole other 2-hour show, but she wrote about effects of technology on kids and, where is that not okay line now? It's funny because I was just thinking about that the other day, just this week, with the growing issues of everything that you hear on the news and ISIS and all that stuff. I don't know why, but I was sitting in my car in traffic, of course, it's New York City, and I was just thinking about how technology could possibly be the creation of what we're seeing now that's being broadcasted out in the news. Has technology disassociated, society or disassociated people from society that we just don't have feelings anymore? We don't, we don't have true emotions anymore because we have been indoctrinated, or kids have been indoctrinated now, into this world of technology. My 2-year-old niece knows how to work an iPad better than I do. I don't even understand and comprehend how that even happens, but she had picked up on it so quickly, I guess by learning from, my sister and my brother-in-law, that it's amazing. And she'll find things on my sister's phone, on her iPhone, that my sister goes, how did you even get to that point? Like, she'll find games, 2 years old, she'll find games, or she'll find a video of her favorite cartoon on there without even asking anybody. That amazes me. There's good points and there's bad points to technology, but I think overall, technology is, sort of creating a huge distance between us and the real world, and it is making us lifeless and without feeling and without emotion. And I think, the idea of the new world that we're going to be living in, very shortly, is very cold and very, sterile, I think, and void of any feelings or compassion for people. And I think when you start to do that, you disconnect from your consciousness. you are pulling away from that, because I think consciousness holds the heart of you. It holds the essence of you, and that's what I mentioned earlier. That's where life is. And if you are disassociating yourself from the world, from each other, from the reality that exists 5 feet away from you, you are moving away from the consciousness, and you are actually, if you want to say, opening that gateway or opening that door. Now you're closing that door and putting extra chains and extra locks on it, in my opinion. And that's what I'm trying to educate people on. It is good to be healthy and be knowledgeable of technology and everything, but there's a line. I don't know where that is, but there's a line, and I don't know how to go about teaching people what that is. I hope one day somebody will. I don't think it's going to be me, but this is a whole, Krista, that's a whole new show to talk about, and it's paranormal and not paranormal, but that's such a great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, it just goes back to what I believe. Nothing will ever replace human interaction. Technology is a tool, and it should be used just as such. But because there's a lack of interaction between parents and children, between people and others, that we lose that part of it, and that is part of our consciousness. That is a big part of our consciousness, is the human interaction. And once we lose that, we are going to lose our humanity.
Tonight's discussion was so amazing, and again, every time we talk about and we talk with our guests, it goes into so many different tangents that fascinates me, and I hope fascinates you guys. So thank you all for welcoming Louisa Oakley Green to the show tonight. I think it's amazing, and her book, Sightseeing in the Undiscovered Country, we highly suggest that you go out and research it and read it. So thank you all for welcoming her. So, Lucy, why don't you get on to the Fan of the Week?
Okay, and this week, our Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week is Oscar Sanchez of Las Vegas, Nevada. He is a member of the Paranormal Review Radio fan page. He likes Dragon Ball Z, Cyanide and Happiness, Adult Swim, Jack Daniels, and of course, he likes Paranormal Review Radio. Oscar commented that he would like to be a Fan of the Week. So here you go, Oscar. Thank you for being a fan, and congratulations.
Yeah, thanks, Oscar. And that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Well, what happens in Vegas stays at Paranormal Review Radio. Don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on Facebook, Paranormal Review Radio.
Well, you know what? There are so many things that happen to us each day, things that we don't really notice until maybe afterwards. How we felt or saw something, how that little voice in our head says something. Now, whether it's a warning or anticipation of something that we know that's going to happen, it happens to all of us. We all have psychic ability. We just don't all know it. The human brain is an amazing thing, and science is still searching for the answers as to how it works until we accept all of the experiences that humans have, even the ones with no real explanation. We won't find the answers. And not all of those answers are going to be found by science. Many will be found by you and me. Now, next Friday night, November 27th, is Black Friday, the day that many of us will be battling our way through the malls to get those bargains. So, what better way to end the day than with a ghost box session? Yes, kids, it's time for another one of our infamous ITC nights. This time, we are going to be contacting the 9 hikers from the Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959 in Russia. Last week, we reviewed the mysterious case, and authorities still cannot solve this case after 50 years. So maybe we might be able to get some answers from the victims themselves. So join us and let's communicate with the other side right here on Paranormal Review Radio. Thank you, everyone, for spending every Friday night with us. You guys rock. Thank you, Anthony, for being the best co-host on this planet. So until next week, Parapeeps, keep the lines of communication open and have a paranormal week. Good night and happy Thanksgiving.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio. Paranormal Review Radio.